Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Stephen King Cast, one man's musings on the works of Stephen King. Each week, I will review one entry in the bibliography of Stephen King in the chronological order of publication. And in this episode, I have the pleasure of reviewing Stephen King's 2020 collection of novellas, If It Bleeds.
But before we begin, I just want to give a shout out to the creators of the musical introduction to this episode, John and Al Kaplan, who create a series of hilarious and incredibly catchy Arnold Schwarzenegger-themed musicals based on the movies of his heyday, including Total Recall, Conan the Barbarian, Terminator 2, Commando, and the one that I just used for the purposes of this podcast, Predator, the musical, which includes the refrain that has been stuck in my head since I first heard that King was releasing this particular collection of novellas. If it bleeds, we can kill it. So let's put If It Bleeds into a little bit of context. Throughout the years, Stephen King obviously has blessed us with many, many novels, many collections of short stories, but less so collections of novellas. He first gave us different seasons and set a high water mark for what he can do with the novella. Just think about the impact of different seasons and the collection and the stories that are within that particular collection and how they have lived on past just being the printed page. They've gone on to become very well regarded and beloved cinematic adaptations of varying degrees. Of course, we have Apt Pupil, which was adapted by Bryan Singer, who at the time was coming off the success of The Usual Suspects. Bryan Singer, most recently, his career has gone down in flames due to a lot of inappropriate conduct and allegations of sexual harassment and worse. But once upon a time in the 90s, in the late 90s, he was an up and comer. Coming off the heels of one of 90s most celebrated films with one of the greatest twist endings in all cinema history, and was also given the reins to the X-Men franchise and got that up off the ground. And I don't believe that the first movie holds up very well, or even X2, which is blasphemous to say, but had it not been for those movies, we would not have gotten anything close to resembling Avengers Endgame. And I led with Apt Pupil because I wanted to get Apt Pupil out of the way, because Different Seasons isn't remembered for the adaptation of Apt Pupil. If anything, Different Seasons is going to be uttered with the same breath Shawshank Redemption, or as it was published in Different Seasons, Rita Hayworth in the Shawshank Redemption, which obviously has gone on to live a very solid life on TNT, and no joke, considered to be the most popular and most well-beloved movie of all time, Shawshank Redemption. And before Shawshank Redemption hit and stole our hearts and changed people's perspective of what Stephen King could do, he gave us The Body, which Rob Reiner adapted into Stand By Me, which was an 80s beloved film classic, which at the time was the first adaptation to do what Shawshank would ultimately do, but just change people's opinion, the everyman's opinions on the quote-unquote master of horror. In the 90s, he gave us Four Past Midnight, which includes the batshittery of the Langoliers, a story so insane it somehow works. He gave us The Sundog, which opens up the doors to his next publication, which would be Needful Things. He gave us in that collection Secret Window, Secret Garden, which I will discuss a little bit later in this podcast, and The Library Policeman, which is a novella that is deeply disturbing and troubling. And so I would say that Four Past Midnight, the stories there isn't as much a consistency with the level of quality, the way that Different Seasons had, and Different Seasons also included The Breathing Method, which has yet to be adapted. In the 2000s, he gave us Full Dark, No Stars, which I believe is a near thematic masterpiece for King. Longtime listeners will know that I believe that Stephen King happens to be a very optimistic writer. Though he is very pragmatic in his writing, he does operate under the belief that when a community rallies together, rather than individually, it's only once they have come together that they can combat whatever the conflict is, whatever the villain is, whatever the theme is that has taken on some sort of monster's disguise. He has gone on to label this concept quartet. From many, we are one. But Full Dark, No Stars is not an optimistic collection. It is a very bleak, very cynical collection of novellas. Right there in the title, Full Dark, No Stars. There's no hope. It really explores the worst aspects of humanity, beginning with Big Driver. First a rape and then revenge story. We get a marriage story, which is it's a fascinating examination of marriages through the lens of a serial killer. It's really a great story. And I believe that during his writing of A Good Marriage, he winds up laying the groundwork for what will be the next phase of his career, which is the detective fiction, which will most famously include Bill Hodges, who will give us Holly Gibney, who I will speak about more later in this episode. The collection also includes the story Fair Extension, which I will discuss later in this podcast, as well as 1922, which I will discuss later in this podcast. But since then, he hasn't given us a collection of novellas, which is why I'm excited that he returns to this. That story that is somewhere between a short story and a novel is a slice that Stephen King tends to excel at. He's given us a number of entries that have been included in short story publications before that have filled out the pages longer than the short story companions. The Mist in different seasons. I'm sorry, in Skeleton Crew comes to mind. So this is definitely an area where he excels at, and I was looking forward to reading this to see if he still had what it takes. And I just, obviously there is a joy that comes from reading a Stephen King book, and how it's been at the least a twice a year tradition for decades, as long as I've been a Stephen King reader, as long as I've been alive. There is just something about getting a Stephen King book that I for years took for granted, and since this podcast has come out, it reminded me the importance of it and why it's so special. But honestly, guys, to continue this tradition during the pandemic, for a moment, it just made everything feel normal again. To get it in the mail, usually I like to go to Barnes & Noble and pick up the book, but to get it in the mail, I was waiting for it, and I'm kind of glad that I had to wait for it, because it, like many people who ordered If It Bleeds, there was a backlog or just a delay in getting it shipped out or shipped. Or there was some issue. I don't know, but I know that there was a lot of chatter online about people getting their book a couple weeks late, and that's what happened to me. But in this day and age in which you get everything when you want it, there's something to be said about waiting again. And I really enjoyed waiting for it. I really enjoyed waking up every morning and checking my Amazon orders status to see where it was and if it had shipped yet, and once it was shipped, where it was. And I got excited again. I think there's something to be said about waiting. And so finally when it arrived, to open it up and hold it in my hands, and it's a singular type of excitement, the new Stephen King book, And I just really take pleasure from being able to share that still to this day. And then now, with the purposes of this podcast, to share it all with you guys. So I'm really excited about to talk about If It Bleeds. You know, I've been talking about it for 10 minutes so far, and I haven't really gotten into it yet. So there's going to be a lot of good stuff to parse out. It'll be one of my longer episodes. So I'm sorry for those that don't like the longer episodes, and you're welcome for those of you who do. So before I get any further, there are two things that I want to do. I want to read just a couple iTunes reviews and some emails. So with the iTunes reviews, if you do have any time on your hands, you have no idea how much it helps me by leaving an iTunes review, because it keeps me up in the top, around the top of the search for on iTunes when people type in Stephen King, and it keeps the podcast going. Because if no one's listening, then I don't know if I would continue to do it. So this helps keep the podcast going. So listener JR138WER138 writes, "Great, 5 stars. One of the things I love that you do with each episode is when you share your experience of reading the novels. This gets me to think the same and unlock memories, putting the cultural impact of King's works in perspective with the events of my own life. This is similar to what the public knows of King's own personality, what his fans have learned of the man by reading his works. I'm now only 20 casts in, but now instead of jumping ahead, I'm listening chronologically. So thank you, JR138WER138. I really appreciate it." And then Max Foster writes, "For fans by a fan, 5 stars. Great podcast. You can tell the host has a great appreciation for the works of King, and his reviews reflect a great deal of time and effort spent considering the text and the author's intent. Highly recommended for the serious King fans out there." Thank you, Max Foster. I do try. Okay, up next, I have a couple listener emails, just two short little emails. The first one does include spoilers for If It Bleeds. I just want to throw that out there. And this is from Kevin, who writes, "Hey there, CR. I finished If It Bleeds a couple of days ago and wanted to drop you a quick note with my quick thoughts. I have to be honest, I was not a fan of The Institute or Sleeping Beauties. I enjoyed Revival, The Outsider, and thought Elevation was okay, but not great. So King's batting average for me in recent years was about 500 or so. Great for a ball player, but not for a writer in my opinion. So I came to If It Bleeds with very cautious optimism. I'm happy to say I loved it, although I definitely see some major flaws. I don't think any one of the 4 stories was particularly original or brilliant, but what I loved about these tales, and what I felt had been missing in The Institute especially, was that there were characters that I cared about. Every story had a strong character, and even if the story was not revelatory, the writing was much better and clearer than I feel that's been in a few years. I'm sure you'll go into each of the 4 novellas deeply, and I will defer to you to do the analysis, but I was just glad that the Stephen King who wrote If It Bleeds felt like the same guy who wrote Different Seasons, It, and My Pretty Pony, which are my all-time favorite for novella collections, novel and short story. I still and always appreciate the podcast. Keep it going. Long days and pleasant nights, Kevin." Thank you, Kevin, for writing in, and yes, I will get into each of the 4 novellas. And then Richard writes, "Hello. Just a quick email to say how much I'm enjoying your Stephen King cast. Your Stephen King podcast. Only found them recently, and I'm working through the back catalog. As you probably see from my signature, I also run a King cast. Would you consider giving us a mention on your podcast, and naturally we would return the compliment? One of the things I love about King and the podcasting world is the sense of community, of finding like-minded people, so it would be great to enhance that with my listenership. Long days and pleasant nights, Richard." So yes, Richard, I'm going to do that. There are two areas I'm going to point listeners to if you want more things, all things King, or else. We have this right here. Please check out the Hollowed Histories podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, and anywhere else you can get podcasts. Each month we look at one slice of East Anglian history, folklore, and general weirdness. Don't forget to write a review and check out our forthcoming film screenings at hollowedhistories.org. And we also produce and host the UK's largest Stephen King podcast, the Constant Reader podcast. Every month we look at a different novel or adaptations from the King canon. Find it wherever you find podcasts and get in touch with us at theconstantreaderpodcast@gmail.com. So from one Stephen King podcast host to another, good luck, congratulations, and thank you for doing good work out there. Okay, guys, so here we go. I'm going to start to get into If It Bleeds. And the first novella that we have is Mr. Harrigan's Phone. So from Wikipedia, and the Wikipedia summaries are so short on these four, so that's going to not eat up that much time. A teenager finds that a dead friend's cell phone that was buried with the body still communicates from beyond the grave. Craig gets a job working for the retired Mr. Harrigan when he's just 9 years old, watering plants and reading to the old man, who was retired in the small town of Harlow, Maine, after a successful business career. As the years go on, Craig buys an iPhone from him as a thank you gift after a scratch-off lotto ticket that Harrigan had gifted the boy's parents. Had gifted the boys pays off. The old man is reluctant to accept the phone at first, but comes to enjoy it. When Mr. Harrigan dies, Craig places the phone in his pocket to be buried with him. One night, missing his friend, he leaves a voice message. To his shock, he gets a text in return. Craig will learn that not everything dead is gone. All right, I'm going to just begin by reading part of page 8. It's very early, obviously. It's 8 pages into the story, but it's early in where we're first learning about Craig. And this is what he writes. She was a good mom. I still missed her bad in 2004 when I started working for Mr. Harrigan, although she had been dead 3 years then. Now, 16 years later, I still miss her, although her face has faded in my memory, and photos only refresh it a little. What that song says about motherless children is true. I have a hard time. I loved my dad, and we always got along fine, but that song's right on another point, too. There's so many things your daddy can't understand. Like making a daisy chain and putting it on your head in the big field behind our house and saying today you're not just any little boy, you're King Craig. Like being pleased but not making it out to be a big deal, bragging it all when you start reading Superman and Spider-Man comic books at the age of 3. Like getting in bed with you if you wake up in the middle of the night from a bad dream where Dr. Octopus is chasing you. Like hugging you and telling you it's okay when some bigger boy, Kenny Yanko for instance, beats the living shit out of you. I could have used one of those hugs on that day. A mother hug on that day might have changed a lot. It's just a beautiful passage, and though not about mothers necessarily, it's meaningful when you consider the introduction to Joe Hill's Full Throttle collection, which came out this past December, this past year. You know, with that, the introduction is all about really the comic books and the relationship to comic books and the reading experience with his father and then the other parental writer figures that he's had. But to hear Stephen King specifically write about, Spider-Man and Superman and Dr. Octopus so quickly after his own son had written a very lengthy sequence about the relationship of parents to these characters really stood out to me. One of the things that King does well and does early on is really focus on the shared love of reading between Harrigan and Craig, and that the relationship springs out of this shared reading experience that these two characters have with another. Had it not been for the reading experience, this particular novella and the events therein would not exist. It was because of this shared reading experience that creates the bond between these two characters. And what's interesting here is that the strength of King is our relationship to King. We are constant readers. I just read off a listener email from Richard, whose podcast is the Constant Reader Podcast. We are Stephen King's constant readers, and he knows that about us, and he's very appreciative of that to us. And early on in his career, he tried on different personas with, as I've said in my Night Shift short story review, you can tell he's trying to create an EC Comics Tales from the Crypt Keeper styled persona, and it doesn't quite fit. It's interesting and it's fun, but it's not him. It's not his voice. His strength was that he's able to capture everyday life and filter it through a lens of the sublime and the unnatural. And from there, he just was authentic. That's his strength, authenticity. And he's authentically himself to us through his reading. So in a way, the constant reader in this case is Craig to Harrigan as Stephen King. And the description of Harrigan's house, by the way, to me, just sounded familiar to anyone that has heard Stu from Stephen King Tours describe Stephen King's house. We get to know Craig and his father and Harrigan very quickly. As always, King expertly and lovingly creates a believable world that feels real to us. It feels familiar. A young boy out of a Stephen King novel, a part-time job by reading to a wealthy retired businessman. The relationship isn't anything new. An earnest child and a blunt elder is a wonderful combination. And King knows how to mine this relationship. You know, you start to wonder where the horror is going to come in and the plot leading up to him giving him the phone. You know, what's going to happen? You know, I mean, your mind might start to wander towards another story of a youth and an elderly male that was once published in Stephen King's first novella collection, Apt Pupil. And the horror sprung out of that. And it wasn't as idealistic or hopeful or kind as this. So it's very natural to start to wonder, when is this going to turn into, quote unquote, a Stephen King story? By placing the focus of the story in the not too distant past, King is able to do what Sorkin did with The Newsroom, except less preachy. He takes the knowledge of the present and comments on the danger through the characters in the past who are cognizant enough to see the dangers and the fallout from the internet. And King manages to convey it through such a tangible image on page 29. On my walk back down the hill, kicking up clods of that year's last snow, I thought about what he'd said, that with the internet was like a broken water main, spewing information instead of water. It was true of my dad's laptop as well, and the computers at the school and ones all over the country, the world, really. Although the iPhone was still so new to him, he could barely figure out how to turn it on. Mr. Harrigan already understood the need to fix the broken pipe business. If he knew, as he knew it anyway, was going to continue as it always had. I'm not sure, but I think he foresaw paywalls a year or two before the term was even coined. Certainly I didn't know it then, no more than I knew how to get around restricted operations which had become known as jailbreaking. Paywalls came, but by then people had gotten used to getting stuff for free, and they resented being asked to cough up. People faced with a New York Times paywall went to a site like CNN or Huffington Post instead, usually in a huff, even though the reporting wasn't as good. You know, so it's that broken water pipe. You know, he takes the abstract concept of a change in society, and he's able to just render it so perfectly through something that we can visualize. King uses the rise of tech to mark the passage of time. Apple, Spam, Amazon, etc. He's doing it through the conversational tone of two characters to keep it firmly in a character standpoint, so it never dips into heavy-handed territory. I stopped reading at times to wonder if the conceit of the story was unimaginative, an old man standing in for the old ways, and the young boy representing the future. But because King keeps the characters front and center, they never become caricatures, and it rises above the limitations of the concept because King, again, knows how to be authentic to the particular moments that our characters find themselves in. So when Craig finds the body of Mr. Harrigan, you come to like the old coot. King, however, does not sensationalize the moment. It's rendered through the eyes of Craig, who for a moment treats the situation as someone who exists in a world where Stephen King is a thing, where he fully expects Harrigan to rise from the dead and to come for him. But that's not the King story that King is writing. Instead, he walks us through the grieving process, which he has aptly nailed time and time again, most notably in the books Pet Sematary and Revival for its most gut-wrenching, but also in quieter scope with Insomnia, Hearts in Atlantis, Needful Things, Bag of Bones, and From a Buick 8. We're also treated to the Willy Wonka-esque bequeathment of riches from the eccentric, reclusive billionaire with a glass elevator to our young protagonist. A detail like that is designed to purposely lead us to this illusion, and the story could have ended there. A small tale of the brief friendship between two generations on the end of their shared time together on this planet, each giving back to each other and learning from one another. But King uses the entirety of that plot as the first half in order to Stephen King it up the second half, in which he says, fuck it. I'm going with undead haunted zombie iPhone. And that's not a criticism, because time after time, King somehow makes the impossible work. As I speak these words, it sounds stupid. And yet the imagery of a young boy pressing his ear against the grave to see if he can hear the ringing of "Stand by your man" 6 feet below is so vivid and haunting. Of course, it's King adding that little touch of Tammy Wynette that makes it pop as well as it does. And the small detail that Craig isn't getting full-on voicemails from the undead body of Mr. Harrigan, but random text messages. It's enough to build mystery, but not enough to be full-on ghoulish. It allows Craig to do what we do in moments of uncertainty, when we question the universe and look for a greater design. We draw our own conclusions to find an answer in the most unanswerable questions in the cosmos. Because this is fiction, King does give us an answer. And in terms and conditions of the story, Harrigan is answering the phone 6 feet below, and he is assisting in the deaths of both the bully and the drunk driver who killed 4 beloved teachers. But still, of course, it serves up the purpose of the.
At PwC, we bring the business why and the tech how so you can outperform every challenge. So you can do everything you do better than ever so you can drive your company to the leading edge. Let's get started at pwc.com/us/leading edge.
The theme of letting go. But even if you strip it from that, King lately has really been looking at the cosmos and the questions that this world and the world beyond pose to us. I think that, with Bill Hodges, he really took a turn towards an introspective look at death, not in a way of horror, but of just questioning it and just wondering. And we saw that, of course, we saw it in The Outsider when Holly was thinking about Bill. We saw it in Elevation, and we're seeing it here, and we'll see it again later in this particular collection. It's something that's on his mind. And I don't mind him doing it, because he's doing it well. And, I think the more opportunity... So, in Night Shift, one of the things that Stephen King says at the beginning was that the writing about horror becomes very cathartic because it forces you to confront mortality and the things that truly scare you. You're not really scared of vampires. You're scared what vampires deliver to you, which is ultimately death, and so on and so forth. And through these stories, it's a form of catharsis that allows you to handle the emotions that you don't want to think about. So King, through stories like this and through Elevation, he's easing us. By easing himself, I imagine. He thinks about it. He's older, in the conclusion to the Institute, and in the conclusion to this collection, he references a friend who recently has passed away. And the older we get, the more times we have to say goodbye. And we think more about this concept that will be rushing at us at some point. And we're forced to confront it. And we're forced to have our minds turn towards it. And no one likes to think about. But I am very grateful for the fact that Stephen King is thinking about it. And easing us into it. In the end, we have another coming-of-age tale through the lens of a Stephen King story. So there's a couple themes. We have a wistful look back on a time period not too long ago, but it feels like a lifetime ago. It would have felt like a lifetime ago even without the coronavirus and murder hornets, but now it seems like it's from a completely alternate reality. Harrigan, discusses objects owning you, which is definitely the case. I can't put my phone down. One of the benefits to technology, I would say, in being addicted is that it has made the pandemic that easier to handle. Right now, you're listening to this podcast, which was created through technology, which I'm addicted to, and you possibly are addicted to as well. If you're bopping around your house, listening to my thoughts. So it's there's definitely truth. There's definitely truth to what Harrigan is talking about. And 2007 was not that long ago, but like I said, so much has changed. I remember 2005, 2006, when I swore I would never buy a smartphone. I was so adamant that was never going to happen. I was up on my high horse, and man, that seems like a different person uttered those words. Just a couple random things about this particular novella that I'd like to say. I really like Harrigan's voicemail box message. I'm not answering my phone now. I will call back if it seems appropriate. I just really like that. And I know that for the last couple minutes, things have gotten maybe a little somber. And this isn't going to ease us out of that somberness, talking about death. But I feel like there's a couple lines in this novella that might be poured over in the future. When that day comes, when Stephen King does pass away. Lines like, "I do know two things, however, and they are as solid as New England rock. I don't want to be cremated when I go, and I want to be buried with empty pockets." We have a couple Easter eggs. Harlow, Maine was the location of N and Revival. Shawshank is referenced. Castle Rock is referenced. And we have some Kingisms. The fan favorite, hair turning white. The bully's hair turns white. Haunted cell phones is not the first time Stephen King has given us this particular, haunted device. Most famously in Cell, but you could apply this to haunted technology, which of course would include Christine from a Buick 8, Word Processor of the Gods, Mile 81, and The Mangler. We have the writer. Craig grows up, he wants to be a writer. It's the good old writer protagonist. It won't be the last one that we see in this collection. Motorcycle road trip. For the book tour of Insomnia, King famously toured each stop on his motorcycle. In this story, there's a motorcycle crash death accident stemming from a bed and breakfast tour on motorcycles. We also have a drunk driver who kills the teachers in June of 1999. Stephen King was almost taken from this world due to a drunk driver, and this is something that King has turned to. He had done it before, but he has definitely revisited it since then. And then we have an instance of throwing a supernatural object into the bottom of a lake, which we have seen in The Monkey and Doohickey, which come to mind. Okay, and then we have The Life of Chuck. Wikipedia. And good thing I didn't read the Wikipedia summary before I started reading The Life of Chuck, because I really like the mystery of how it begins. Wikipedia states, as the world around him crumbles into oblivion, a man realizes that he contains multitudes. A story told in reverse, starting with the end of Chuck Krantz's life and moving back in time to show how he lived that life and the muster he discovered in the cupola of the home he grew up in. Okay, so a couple things immediately stand out. The first is that it begins with Act 3, "Thanks, Chuck," along with the first sentence. I'll get to the first sentence in a second, but in the meantime, let's spend a second on the introductory text. First, it's Act 3, not Act 1. This immediately piques my interest. Why Act 3? We're in the final act of a story that we haven't been privy to yet. So to begin at the ending generates a healthy amount of curiosity. This, combined with the title of Thanks, Chuck, naturally makes you question who the title character is and how he factors into Act 3 of this story. And if that wasn't enough, the first sentence, "The day Marty Anderson saw the billboard was just before the internet finally went down for good." Now, let's look at this for a second. We're all living in a quarantining world. The role of the internet, as I just discussed, is necessary for the consistency of normalcy, and it's fun through a fictional means, not through a real world means. But it's exciting in a fictional world to explore a world in which the internet no longer exists. This is now the second story in this collection in which modern technology is critiqued. The title card soon becomes clear that the loss of the internet is just one symptom of a larger disease that's affecting our characters, nothing short of the possible end of the world. Honestly, the depiction of the slow, incremental death of things playing out against a mundane perspective really, really hit home. For those of you listening at some point in the future, first of all, I hope that there is a future that you're listening to. I'm recording this in the middle of a months-long quarantine due to the coronavirus, or COVID-19, to all of us constant readers out there. The year might be 2020, but everything's coming up 19. I'll be honest here. A part of my job is to maintain normalcy for a community. And there's been times when I've wondered, what's the point of trying to do so when things just aren't normal? So to have within the first few pages a teacher meeting with parents about their children's ability to craft an argument in a paper while there are mass suicides, earthquakes destroying the coast of California, overcrowding due to refugees, it all hits very close to home. Unlike Cell or The Stand, which saw the end of civilization come about because of a singular initiating event, this is different. It's a series of terrible things that are occurring. Wildfires, volcanic eruptions, sinkholes, the bee population dying out, flooding coastal areas. It goes back to the Yeats poem. This is the way the world ends, now with a bang but a whimper. King is really exploring it here. And if truth were fiction, we might be applying the same poem to our current reality. It isn't just one thing that's eroding the fabric of our society. It's not just COVID. It's the protesters. It's not just the number of infections or strains on the economy. It's transparency over the failure of our government institutions to do the right thing when giving enough pressure. It's the lack of human decency shown during these times. It's climate change. It goes on and on. If it was just the end of the world, the story would be redundant. We've seen it played out already, and some might argue, as I just posited, that we might be seeing it play outside our windows. But King adds that extra thread of mystery and whimsy with the reoccurring appearance of the billboard/TV ads celebrating the retirement of the mysterious Chuck. It's such a weird addition that buoys the mood and keeps it from sinking, like the sinkholes that popped up and swallowed 20 cars downtown. As King continues to explore the life of Marty, which is uneventful and identifiable, King introduces another character, a stranger to Marty, an elderly man he meets along the way to his ex-wife's house, which posits that the occurrences throughout the globe are a result of the Earth's rotation slowing down, which isn't a concept that I see too often in fiction, if ever. It places the mundanity of the characters struggling with little things like a lack of television or the crash of the internet in the context of universal forces beyond their control. It's one thing to accept that volcanoes are erupting, or earthquakes are breaking apart land masses, or bees are dying. These things, though vast, are within our comprehension because they are of our planet, and disasters that we can interact with. The rotation of the planet itself is a concept in which there is no solution, a problem much bigger than one we can combat. A weirder occurrence is the evolution of the strange Chuck Krantz appearances, which escalates in a surreal and unsettling sequence in which the ghostly image of Chuck Krantz appears on everyone's window seconds after all the electricity goes out. It's one thing for the figure to appear on billboards and on TV ads, but this is adding a strange and nightmarish wrinkle to this ominous harbinger of death. And then things get really weird in a way that immediately gives an electric volt charge to the reading experience. The perspective switches from Marty to a previously unseen character, Doug, who sits beside the deathbed of his brother-in-law, you guessed it, Chuck Krantz. And as Doug tries to comfort his nephew, the dying Chuck's son, King provides the thrust of the novella, which recontextualizes Marty, Felicia, and everyone else that we had previously met. The human brain is finite, no more than a sponge of tissue inside a cage of bone. But the mind within the brain is infinite. Its storage capacity is colossal. Its imaginative reach beyond our ability to comprehend. I think when a man or woman dies, a whole world falls to ruin. The world that person knew and believed in. Think of that, kiddo. Billions of people on Earth, and each one of those billions with a world inside. Their Earth their minds have conceived. And now my dad's world is dying. But not ours, Doug says, and gives his nephew another squeeze. Ours will go on a little longer. And your mother's. We need to be strong for her, Brian. As strong as we can. Once King establishes this, he switches back to Marty and Felicia, who experience the true end of things as the stars themselves go out as Chuck himself dies. Then King moves backwards into Act 2, Buskers. What began as an end-of-the-world story morphs into a celebration of life, as we get to know the dying Chuck before he knows he's dying, still alive, still living his day-to-day existence. King treats us to a sequence that is honestly quite beautiful, and captures the randomness and excitement that life can offer. When Chuck, daydreaming about his days as the lead singer of a cover band, starts to dance to the rhythm of street performers drumming and is joined by a young woman recently dumped. Three strangers who have nothing in common for this moment come together to make magic, and King sticks with it through the rest of this day. King doesn't sully the moment with flirtation between Chuck and Janice, and there's no adultery. Just two strangers dancing and loving the moment. Honestly, it was a beautiful segment, completely unexpected based on how the story began. And he concludes with Act 3, contains multitudes. Things that matter to King. And it's the little things that matter to me as a reader of Stephen King. It's why his words continue to echo within me and probably will until I am my own Chuck Krantz in my own final moments. We move back farther in the life of Chuck, focusing on the aftermath of his parents' and unborn sister's car crash death at the age of 7. And he writes, "The Crancenses had not only lost their son and daughter-in-law, they had lost the granddaughter who would have been born just 3 months later. The name had already been picked out, Alyssa. When Chuck said that sounded like... I gotta read this right. When Chuck said that sounded to him like rain, his mother had laughed and cried at the same time. He never forgot that." Such a beautiful, beautiful sentiment. Such a great description of the name Alyssa. So for all the Alyssas out there, your name sounds like rain. What became apparent with the concluding chapter is King's balance of life and death and the relationship of one another. Despite the presence of death, or perhaps because of it, our characters are galvanized by life. It sounds quaint, but there's a potent truth to it. Probably because when you remove every artifice, affectation, conflict, hang-up, interest, hobby, all we have are those two opposing forces, life and death. In Act 3, with the end of his world hurtling towards him, he literally races towards his ex-wife, Marty, and dies while declaring his love. In Act 2, with his tumor already starting to take hold of his brain, despite the dwindling lifespan, he has a powerful electric declaration of life. And similarly, in Act 1, despite the deaths of his parents, his grandmother, and the ghosts of dead people yet to be, he is again defined by his dancing and the joy comes with it, and that's life. It's a sign of King's strength that the day-to-day life of this character is so captivating that you forget the concept of ghosts of the future, conjured visions of deaths in a later day that are a part of this story. It's the literalization that we all have to face, the truth of our own mortality. It functions on a literal level, sure, but its existence is really only there to serve up the theme of the importance to live the life you have. Or as King writes, "I will live my life until my life runs out. I am wonderful, I deserve to be wonderful, and I contain multitudes." Okay, we have some Easter eggs here. First up is number 19. That's Felicia's apartment number. And number 19 is the haunted number that springs out of the Dark Tower saga. Speaking of which, there is a reference to a gunslinger. It's not an overt connection to our gunslinger, but King knows that words have power and knows that we will immediately think of Roland when he refers to dancing Chuck as a gunslinger. Then we have a couple Stephen Kingisms. First of which being the end of the world. We have seen this, time and time again. The Stand, Cell, Night Surf. And then dancing is life. Chuck grabbing a hold of life and dancing with a recently broken up with Janice definitely evoked Sadie and Jake from 11/22/63. And unsurprisingly, last but not least for Stephen Kingisms, a car crash, which we have seen time and time again. Up next, we have the titular "If It Bleeds." From Wikipedia, Holly Gibney of the Finders Keepers Detective Agency is working on the case of a missing dog when she sees footage of a school bombing on TV. But when she tunes in again to the late night report, she realizes that there's something not quite right about the correspondent who was first on the scene. Soon she will find that she's not the only one to have suspicions about the reporter. Gibney is one of King's reoccurring characters, having appeared in his Bill Hodges trilogy, Mr. Mercedes, Finding Keepers, and End of Watch, and The Outsider. First up, we got to talk about the opening here on page 155. In January of 2021, a small padded envelope addressed to Detective Ralph Anderson is delivered to the Conrads, the Andersons' next-door neighbors. The Andersons family is on an extended vacation in the Bahamas thanks to an endless teachers' strike in Anderson's home county. Ralph insisted that his son Derek bring his books, which Derek termed a grotesque bummer. The Conrads have agreed to forward their mail until the Andersons return to Flint City, but printed on this envelope in large letters is "Do not forward, hold for arrival." When Ralph opens the package, he finds the flash drive titled "If It Bleeds," presumably referring to the old news trope which proclaims, "If it bleeds, it leads." The drive holds 2 items. One is a folder containing photographs and audio spectrograms. The other is a kind of report or spoken word diary from Holly Gibney, with whom the detective shared a case that began in Oklahoma and ended in a Texas cave. It was a case that changed Ralph Anderson's perceptions of reality forever. The final words of Holly's audio report are from an entry dated December 19th, 2020. She sounds out of breath. "I have done the best I can, Ralph, but it may not be enough. In spite of all my planning, there's a chance I won't come out of this alive. If that's the case, I need you to know how much your friendship has meant to me. If I do die and you choose to continue what I've started, please be careful. You have a wife and son." This is where the report ends. But thankfully for us, this is where our story begins. So how great is it that this is coming so fresh off of the heels of HBO's fantastic The Outsider adaptation? So I did not do a full episode by episode replay or review of The Outsider on HBO. It was 10 episodes, and I enjoyed 9 of the 10 episodes. I did not happen to like the ending. I want to get that out of the way, partially because I've been talking so much of endings lately. I loved the ending of the book. I didn't like the ending of the adaptation. But with that said, I don't think that detracts from the mastery that was on display throughout the 10 hours. It was a wonderful story, wonderfully recreated. It was an incredible interpretation of the Holly Gibney character by Cynthia Erivo, and Ben Mendelsohn's portrayal of Ralph Anderson is now who I picture in my head. Jason Bateman being in it, all of it was just so well done, and to get this so close to that, it was such a treat, And I recently put a poll up on Twitter about who do you picture when you picture Holly? Do you picture Justine Loop from Mr. Mercedes, the Mr. Mercedes adaptation? Do you picture Cynthia Erivo from The Outsider, or do you picture the Holly in your own mind? I don't put up a lot of stuff on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, but I will say that of the 3 social media outlets, this really generated a lot of conversation on each platform. People definitely had opinions, and it's really split between all 3 options, which is great. And it shows me that people care. People care about this character. They care about this character, Holly, and how she is presented in adaptations. They care about her as King presents her. So King has discussed, and he discusses at the end of this book, that he just loves Holly, and it's really clear, and there's something about it because we all do too. We love Holly Gibney, and I can't wait to get the next Holly Gibney story, even though I just finished this one. It shows how hungry I am for this Holly Gibney universe. So what's cool about this is that now at this point you kind of get to mix and match your favorites. Like I said, Ben Mendelsohn was not how Ralph was described, but it's hard for me to personally not picture him now. So during this section, when King is writing about Ralph getting his mail, that I picture Ben Mendelsohn getting his mail. Every time Holly references Bill Hodges, I'm not picturing Bill as I had imagined him in the books. I'm picturing Brendan Gleeson from Mr. Mercedes, the adaptation. And as for Holly, I picture the Holly as I first met her in Mr. Mercedes in my mind. But as I was reading this, sometimes I just plugged Cynthia Erivo into the role, other times Justine Luke, just for fun. So the story revolves around a bombing at a school, which is horrific. And the bomber is introduced to us before the bomb goes off, as King tends to do, crafting a charismatic villain. And then we get the reintroduction to Holly, Finders Keepers, Pete, Jerome, the references of how important Bill was. We get a reminder of how Holly stopped Brady's attempted suicide explosion at the concert, which links the current bombing to the one Holly had managed to prevent, and Pete's sympathy in the moment. I love how every character inherently understands Holly's goodness and feels the need to protect her from her own guilt. And then Jerome isn't just referenced, but he shows up, and it was good to see him again. I feel between The Outsider and The Outsider 8 HBO adaptation, we haven't seen him much. And speaking of The Outsider, there's a nice moment in which Holly bristles at the term outside evil due to its proximity to the outsider. And it's with this philosophical conversation that King starts to get at the heart of this story, which places it firmly in the realm of fiction. That there's no difference between inside evil and outside evil. That the horrors that man visits upon his fellow man spring from an outside entity manipulating things. It's an understandable premise. After all, it's the foundational block of Christianity. And I see why it's so appealing in fiction. You can explain away the more chaotic and pessimistic qualities of our species and society, and through this explanation, create a solution to these problems, or at the very least, an excuse for them. With King Evil, we have seen in the past, these outside manipulators, Flag, Gaunt, Pennywise, right? But we've also seen the Crimson King, the People of Derry, Pimley Prentice at Al Jul Ciento. We've seen, the ignorance that comes with evil, that it isn't grand, it is chaotic, it's low. There's a reason why King referenced the men in yellow coats as low men in yellow coats. He has really stopped celebrating evil. He hasn't really been giving us charming depictions of evil entities. They've been pathetic. The Outsider in The Outsider is just a truly pathetic creature. So in this particular novella, we get both. We get the banality of evil, as we'll see later on with this particular outsider who is subject to blackmail. And you just can't see the Randall Flaggs of the world, being blackmailed, right? Because they are more on a pedestal, of a stylistic pedestal. But, the big Jim Rennies of the world that would respond to blackmail, and he's one of the most villainous Stephen King villains that have ever existed. Anyway, just something to think about. After an evening of watching the footage of the bombing, Jerome and Holly get to spend some time together. And because he sat out the events of The Outsider, it's good to see Jerome back in action. And on the road trip, King uses the opportunity to talk about race in America on pages 182. It's from Balzac. Behind every great fortune there is a crime. That was a theme I saw, even though the fortune ran through his fingers long before he was shot down in Cicero. It really is like The Godfather, Holly marvels, but Jerome shakes his head. It's not, because black people can never be American in the same way Italian and Irish people can. Black skin withstands the melting pot, I want to say. He pauses. I want to say that discrimination is the father of crime. I want to say that Alton Robinson's tragedy was that he thought that through crime he could achieve some sort of equality, and that turned out to be a chimera. In the end, he wasn't killed because he got crossways with Polyrika, who was Capone's successor, but because he was black, because he was an N-word. It's just a very quick but profound examination on a couple things, on crime, on race, on inequality that comes from a highly intelligent character, and one that I like the way that King protects Jerome. In The Outsider, he made the cognitive decision to not rope Jerome into the story, because if he was in the story, he probably would die. And so I like the fact that he sat out, because I don't want these thoughts that come to us from Jerome to be lost in the future. They then head to Holly's mother's house, which is not something you often see in King's works, of an adult protagonist with a relationship to a still living parent, now elderly. You know, King lost his mother at an early age, and King writes what he knows, which is why we get so many stories about writers. So as a result, I think that we have been robbed of stories that include an adult protagonist with their parent. You know, the one that really stands out to me in the most recent years is Wendy Torrance. There really wasn't any reason to not have Wendy in Dr. Sleep. That would have been fascinating to have Wendy in Dr. Sleep. But we just don't really get to see many instances of parents and their adult children. So it's good to see Holly with her adult mother. Even though it's a fraught relationship, it's still good to see this relationship. After assisting in putting her uncle in an assisted living home while dealing with the emotional fallout of her family, Holly's subconscious detective skills pick up on the fact that the second time she saw the reporter reporting from the scene of the explosion, what she thought was his mole was missing. As I said in the Outsider review, I'm excited that King has begun to create these series of supernatural detective stories that I had kind of wished that he had done with Alan Pangborn. I think that if Alan Pangborn was the sheriff of Castle Rock and investigating Castle Rock mysteries, that would have been great. We didn't get that, but I like that we're getting Holly Gibney, and this is better. It allows Castle Rock to just be what Castle Rock was, but this allows this sort of monster of the week story that we get. We get this version of Scully and Mulder in Holly. I can't get enough of it, and I love that he loves Holly Gibney, which means that we'll probably get more. I hope. After a little investigation, Holly comes to believe that what she thought was a mole might be in fact the remains of a hastily pulled off fake mustache, which leads the reader to suspect our star reporter as the bomber, which immediately made me think of Jake Gyllenhaal in Nightcrawler. Did you guys see Nightcrawler? That's a wild movie. And now I'm thinking about Jake Gyllenhaal in this story. It's a star-studded collection of characters playing out on the page. It's great. After a little more digging, Holly leaves a message for Ralph in which she discusses the possibility that the current case might involve another outsider. This is cool. King rarely does sequels. We got Dr. Sleep. Obviously, we got... the Dark Tower series, we got Black House, but he doesn't really do sequels. And this is a sequel of character. This isn't just Holly from Mercedes trilogy popping up in someone else's story. This is Holly's story with the events of the Mercedes trilogy and the outsider weighing on her as she hunts down another outsider. It's really cool. And I like that it allows this outsider to be different. And the outsider just might come to represent what is Holly's name for the creatures that populate Stephen King books, which is how the term originated, by the way. Pennywise, Flag were both referred to as outsiders, or having come from the outside. The supernatural creature that appears at the end of Bag of Bones is called the Outsider. Now, I'm not saying that all of these characters, all of these creatures are related, because if you start to really analyze it, they all function differently and they all have different... I hate saying this word because I feel like it's the back of a comic book trading card, but it comes different power sets. I don't want anyone to start thinking that Randall Flagg fits this particular bill, because this is also a character that's steeped in magic, and Leland Gaunt is really a dark imp, shape-shifting little elf that comes from another dimension, so there are definitely differences. So King gets to a point in the story in which we learn that Holly has a therapist, Dr. Morton, who she has told her entire story to, in the hopes that he will tell her story to a larger audience so that she can start to shine a light on the outsiders living in this world and the people that have encountered them, so as to meet them and start to stand against the darkness. And then we meet Dan and Brad, who reveal the history of this outsider, who is different, because El Cuco was more... though he fed on children, and though he had the some telepathy that he was able to influence Jack, he really was weak. It was a weak character that had to hide in the shadows, and this outsider can really blend more within our society. And once she's had enough information, she leaves a message to bait Ondowski in a bold move, listing all of his previous aliases throughout the years. When they meet, it's electric. It's a charismatic villain, again, who is just being open to talking about what he is and who he is. And he's not, he shucks at first, but, when he realized that she's got him, he's not trying to hide it. And I thought I was completely fascinated with that whole scene. He's just the classic King villain, bringing charm. Holly had inner fear but outward strength. Her openness to him, but knowing she's holding something back. From a character standpoint, it was fascinating. From a plot standpoint, I wanted to know what she was hiding. And it's around here that King begins to ratchet up the suspense and the paranoia. Forces seem to work against Holly, a fender bender, traffic jams, all threatening to miss her opportunity to take out the outsider on her own terms, which would leave her vulnerable. And King adds even more tension by having Barbara make her way to Finders Keepers, just as Holly is preparing herself to shoot Ondowski. It's good news, bad news. Good news, Holly has prepared herself. Bad news, Barbara feels a hand on her shoulder right outside. Good news, it's just Jerome. Bad news, Ondowski knocks Jerome out with a brick and advances towards Holly. And it just comes to a thrilling conclusion. We're trying to focus on the elevator. Jerome comes out of nowhere. They work together to do what one cannot, which is all about Ka-Tet. They defeat the outsider. It's thrilling. It's moments like this I feel bad because as I was reading, I wasn't taking too many notes because I was just lost in the moment of the book, and I didn't want to deny myself of that. And it's easier for me to be able to put more of a critical and thoughtful analysis to books that I've read 2-3 times before. But for the first time, I really made an effort to put my phone down and step away from my computer as I read, because I was just so into the moment. And that is my analysis, because King knocked it out of the ballpark. And aside from the monster, the monster adventure of this particular case and all the references to previous King stories and this new mini King universe that he's creating here, there's just a lot to chew on. That this is just a lot about America today. News stories about death. There was the conversation around thoughts and prayers, racism, mass casualties, and ultimately what was the most interesting to me is just the news itself as a vampire monster. That's definitely a loaded concept that's very truthful. All right, we got some Stephen Kingisms. We had sneakers being blown off, which is something that we've seen time and time again. A force of good combating the evil. I'm listing it in Stephen Kingisms and not Easter eggs because he didn't refer to it as the white. Had he done so, that would have been an Easter egg. Psychic vampires, we've seen before, recently in The True Knot. A villain using a brick to the head to inflict damage, most famously with Jack Mort. And King made sure that Ondowski tittered. Tittering villains is a long-standing Stephen Kingism. And then we got some Easter eggs. 219 is when the bomb goes off. 19 is also the street number of one of the characters. Obviously, we have familiar characters and events. Pete, Holly, Jerome, Bill, Ralph, Barbara, Brady, the outsider in the Mercedes trilogy either show up or are referenced. 11/22/63, one of Ondowski's reporter personas is live at the scene of the assassination. Of course, King wrote a whole book about that particular date. In a reference to the Second World, which is described as including telepathy, ghosts, strange disappearances, lights in the sky. King also makes references to flying saucers to killer clowns. All of that describes one Stephen King story or another. Carrie, The Shining, Tommyknockers, Langoliers, Dreamcatcher, It. Inside View. Holly threatens to take the story to Inside View and specifically mentions the Night Flyer. And at one point, Ondowski says the following line, "Give me what I want and I'll go away." Made famous by Andre Lenoge, which was one of his many catchphrases in Storm of the Century. And last but not least, guys, we have Rat. And the Wikipedia summary is this. A writer with writer's block seeks a devilish bargain to help him finish a novel. Okay, Rat. I'm not going to say much about Rat, other than I liked it. We got a novella about obsession and madness and writing, which he has given us before, but he does it very well here. One thing that kind of stuck out to me was the focus of the germs and the sickness of shaking the old man's hand at the gas station and how that gets him sick. And the quarantine then follows. That was just... he wrote this before the quarantine, but then again, he also wrote The Stand before the quarantine. But he definitely has an eye for contagion and the passing of germs and getting sick. But all in all, this was Drew's obsession with trying to crack this particular story and the sensation of losing the words to a story. For anyone that has ever written that has been just possessed by an idea that has forced you to sit down, the feeling when that story starts to leak out of your mind and will not recreate itself on the page is so frustrating. And for King to write an entire story around this madness that comes up from it, it was different enough from the other writer protagonists that he has given us before, even though this does share similarities with other stories about writer protagonists. Like I'll say in the Stephen Kingism section, it's very similar to Secret Window, Secret Garden, which also appeared in a novella collection, that one being 4 Past Midnight. But, when the rat shows up and he's just so matter of fact, it was just the next level of kind of craziness and fun. Everything about it, from Drew's persona, his relationship to his wife, from the descriptions of the cabin and the oncoming storm, every aspect of the writing process that was gripping him, that was working for him, that was getting in the way from him. The little things added up to a very clear picture that I don't have much to say about, other than I thought it was well done and I really, really enjoyed it. All right, so we got some Easter eggs. TR90. TR90 was referenced in Cell, and it also appeared in Bag of Bones. At one point, King writes the following two words together: "Everything's eventual," which was the title of a short story collection and a short story within. And he mentions dairy. And then we have some Stephen Kingisms. Obviously, writers. We've seen writers time and time again in The Shining, Secret Windows, Secret Garden. Specifically, we have writers in isolation going mad, Secret Window, Secret Garden. We have the Faustian bargain that we have seen in Needful Things, but this one felt more along the lines of fair extension. And then we have rats. We've seen rats pop up in Stephen King's works before. I mean, for a second, I actually thought that the wounded rat would later awaken to be a seductive dark lady that we first saw in Nona. She was a rat lady, but then we saw rats in 1922 and Graveyard Shift. So it's not the first time that we've seen a rat. So guys, that's it.
I really liked it, and I was grateful to be able to read it specifically at that particular period of time when it was 2020. We were all in lockdown, getting a new Stephen King collection to pass the time and keep you company. Man, that was a true gift. All right, everyone. So I hope that you enjoyed my review of If It Bleeds. If you have any thoughts on If It Bleeds, write into stephenkingcast@yahoo.com. And if you have any time on your hands, leaving a review on any of the podcast platforms that you use to listen to the Stephen King Cast would be greatly appreciated. And you can always follow me on Blue Sky, TikTok, Facebook, and on Instagram. And may you have long days and pleasant nights, and I'll see you here next time where MOON spells Stephen King Cast.